With the first important theory steps out of the way, now is the time to dive into GitHub. For this, I was searching for GitHub up here in Google, and well, the first result here, github.com, this is the URL we should have a look at now to create our GitHub account. For this, let's explore this page. And there we are on github.com. We had a quick look at this page in the first course module already. And here you can find lots of information about GitHub itself here in the Why GitHub tab. And no need to explore these options at the moment because we will dive into GitHub together, of course. But one important ribbon you should always explore when using such services is the pricing menu up here. Here you can see the different pricing plans GitHub offers. Let's quickly explore these at the time when I'm recording this video. And there you can find a very popular plan and an enterprise plan. Both are paid plans. But you can also see here to the left that we have a free plan. So whenever you're watching this video, make sure to check this page to ensure that the free plan is still available, because this free plan is actually totally sufficient for anybody to get started with GitHub and also for this course. With the pricing out of the way, let's now go back to the main page and either create a GitHub account by entering our email address down here and pressing onto sign up. Or alternatively, we can go to the sign up page up here, there enter our email, and afterwards, well, creating the account right here. I do have an account already, therefore please make sure to create your own account right here. And once you've finished the account creation, please log into your GitHub account. And then you should arrive at this page right here. This is your personal GitHub starting page. Throughout this and the next module, we'll explore lots of the features you can see right here. Up here, this pull request feature, just to give you one example. At this point of the course, I just want to quickly guide you through this interface, because the main goal here now is to create a remote repository and to then bring it to life by adding data from the local repository to this repository on GitHub. Therefore, in this quick tour, we'll just have a look at basic features like here in the left upper part, this logo, which, no surprise, brings us back to the starting page, or also this left column right here, where you can either create a new repository, which we'll do in a few seconds, or where you can also see all your existing repositories that you might have on GitHub already. This account here has no existing repositories to make sure you can follow along with your new account as easy as possible. Some more things you can see right here is this introduce yourself part up there. Here you could create a README file, which you can find on your GitHub landing page to, well, introduce yourself. Because besides the fact that GitHub is a cloud service provider for this GitHub repos, which is great to collaborate on projects with other people, GitHub is also very well known and very great actually to present yourself as a developer. You have your own personal GitHub page, for example, whenever creating a GitHub account. And you can see this page if you go to the right area up here and then click onto your profile. This is your personal GitHub profile, which you can send to other people, potential employees, which might be interested in your skills and in the projects you might be working on or you might have worked on. We'll dive into this GitHub, well, as a presentation platform topic a bit later in the course. Therefore, I just wanted to quickly show you that this, well, profile page and README part, so to present yourself part, is not just, well, something that you could do, but it's actually something that is very important if you want to, well, get a job as developer or web developer. Besides this, here on the profile page, you can actually find all your public repositories you might have, none here in this profile. We also have private repositories in GitHub, which only you or a dedicated or specific target audience can access. You also have an overview of all repositories that you might have on your GitHub page. Also right here, no projects are existing. And we have other options like projects. As I said, this is something we'll dive into a bit later in the course. We could jump back to the main page up here by clicking onto the GitHub logo. And there in this, profile button, as I would call it here, you can also find your repositories as you just saw it as part of the profile. And you can find more things like code spaces, projects, stars, and gists. All things we'll dive into throughout the course again, but not at this stage. The focus here is on the quick GitHub interface and on repositories. Now, talking about repositories, why don't we take the chance and create our first empty GitHub repository as a next step now? You can either do this right here in this create repository part here in the left of your starting page, or you go to your repositories right here. This brings you back to your profile that we just saw and now to this repositories ribbon. And in here, we can now click onto the new button to create a new remote repository. On this page, you can now find, a lot of options regarding your repository. First, important at the top here, you can find the information that you might have a project repository elsewhere and that you can import a repository. This is not related to Git though. Importing a repository here in GitHub means importing it from another cloud hosting provider where your repositories might be hosted. Because GitHub is not the only provider for, Git repository hosting, therefore, if you use an alternative right now, you can use this import feature to quickly bring this repository to GitHub. Again, something we'll of course have a look at, but not the goal at this stage of the course. Down here, things become a bit more interesting. There, we can first define the owner of the repository, which in my case is only the account that I have right here. But in case you use GitHub as part of an organization with multiple users, you can define a specific owner of this repository. Besides that, you should also add a repository name to, be able to identify this repository then. This can be the same name that you used in your Git repository, and this is also the approach we'll follow throughout this course, but it doesn't have to be the same. Of course, if you use the same naming conventions, this makes things easier when working in both of these tools. In here, we'll use GitHub Basics as repository name. We'll also use the same name then in our local repository. Down here, you can add a description, about the repository and what it contains. This is optional, therefore we'll skip this at this point in the course. Down here, very important, you can define whether this repository should be a public repository or a private repository. A public repository, as written right here, can be seen by anyone on the internet. You can only define who can commit, of course. Public repositories are very common these days in open source projects, for example, which means anybody can, see the code and also work on the code, so kind of pull this code down to his own machine. But of course, you can define who can commit to this project. Otherwise, this would be kind of a mess, as you can imagine. Besides that, we also have private repositories. This means repositories only you or people, you give access to this repository can view. In earlier days, private repositories were only part of paid GitHub plans. This changed a while ago, therefore we have the option to do both here. I'll go with the public repository though, because, actually we don't have anything to hide. But of course, feel free to choose whatever you prefer here. If you want to share any private projects, then make sure to select the private option. We'll go with public though. Besides this, you can choose some more options for your repository. For example, you can add a README file to, add a description about your project. You can add a git ignore file, we covered the git ignore part already throughout this course. And you can also choose a license. This also goes a bit beyond the focus of this course at this stage. Therefore, we'll skip these steps down here and simply create this new repository. With this, we successfully created our first remote GitHub repository. And down here, we can find some information about how we can now, connect this remote repository to a local repository. We'll of course do this. Just some more hints here about the navigation inside this project now. If we go back to our main page by clicking onto the GitHub logo once again, we are back on the starting page, but now we can see this repository here to the left, so we can access it right here, and we are back on this code page. Alternatively, we can go to the right here to our profile and then access the profile again. Here you can now find that we have this repository as a popular repository, and we can also find this repository as a contribution here as a specific point in time over here, and also down there. And we can of course also find this repository here in the repositories ribbon. Here we are, and there we can now select this specific repository to be back on this page here. The other options here are not important at this stage of the course. Settings will become important to, for example, delete the repository. We'll of course do this, but the focus right now is on how we can bring the information from the local repository to this remote repository.